Hello and welcome to Q&A. I'm Fran Kelly, and tonight we're in Melbourne collaborating with the Wheeler Centre's Broadside Festival. On our panel, anti-ageism author Ashton Applewhite, Egyptian-American feminist Mona Eltahawy, businesswoman and social change agent Hana Assafiri, Indigenous screenwriter and activist Nayuka Gorrie, and Jess Hill, whose latest work is challenging old assumptions about male violence. Please welcome our panel.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that too often the white experience, the white male experience generally, but the white experience overall, is taken as the default. And I think that the rest of us, those of us who are not white, those of us who are not able-bodied, those of us who are not men, those of us who are not those defaults, end up having to explain that this is not our experience. And I think, you know, when I look at my family in Egypt, when I look at, you know, it's very similar to what you're saying, that it's very rare, although it's some families, because they're split by migration and work abroad and stuff, it's still very rare. But I think it's really important for white people to acknowledge this as their problem and to begin learning from us.
It's also...
Mona, how do we get institutions to, you know, acknowledge racism and do something about it? How do we hold people to account?
Well, you're asking the person here who travels the world to say, fuck the patriarchy. So I think that what we have to do is start seriously talking about dismantling patriarchy. And when I talk about patriarchy, I'm talking about a white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy, to quote Black American feminist Bell Hooks. Because what I'm hearing here is very similar to what's happening in the United States. But I also urge everyone to connect it to what so often in the news is portrayed as a problem in my country of birth, Egypt, where police brutality is connected to a fascist state or a militarist state. And so it's very easy for people to say, oh, look, well, you know, the police beat Mona up in Egypt because, you know, Egypt is a dictatorship. And you rarely make that connection between the dictatorship in Egypt and here in Australia, where you're ostensibly a democracy. But what you're talking about is the overwhelming power of the state. And that state is driven by a white supremacist patriarchy. When I look at your prime minister, when I look at Donald Trump, when I look at Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Egypt, when I look at Bolsonaro, all of these men are patriarchal authoritarians. At the heart of the way that they rule is violence. And that violence depends, the violence is meted out to you depending on where in the hierarchy you belong. And so if you're a woman, if you're queer, if you're of color, if you're disabled, etc., etc. So for me, I say patriarchy is like an octopus. The head of the octopus is misogyny. But the 8 tentacles are these things that we're talking about. So it would be capitalism, it would be police brutality, it would be homophobia. All of these systems of oppression that privilege male dominance, because we're talking about a very specifically male kind of violence, and again, according to the tentacles of the patriarchy. So for me, we have to have a serious discussion. We have to dismantle patriarchy. Does that sound like a pipe dream? It has to be a reality, because it's the year 2019, for those of us who use that calendar, and we're still talking about people being beaten to death by the police. It's unconscionable. I completely and utterly disagree with Barack Obama.
Me too.
I go online exactly to tell people to fuck off when they attack me.
And at this point, I will utter a language warning on the programme. And remind our guests.
No, honestly, it's, you know, this idea of respectability, this idea of civility, this idea of unity, all of these words, decorum, who invented those words? Those words were invented by white men for the benefit of other white men in systems and institutions that were always designed to be for white men. And they weren't designed for women like you and me and so many others. Like you said, people of colour and gender diverse people. They never imagined us in those spaces, and then we show up and we just ruin it for them. And so those who abide by the system, and Barack Obama was part of the system and remains part of the system. I also disagree with his wife when she says when they go low, we go high. No, I fucking don't. If you go low, I'm gonna come for you. So no, I do not have the luxury or the privilege to sit there and be civil with people who do not acknowledge my full humanity. I refuse, number one. Number two, there are so many voices who have found their platform on social media, finally, after being the gatekeepers, refused to let us in for such a long time. I mean, I say, I include myself because I'm kind of in and out, But there are people who have never had any platform. I'm thinking of young black feminists in the United States, indigenous feminists in the United States and Canada, because I move back and forth between the US and Canada. There is one indigenous woman in Canada who every day tweets about missing and killed indigenous women in Canada. Nobody has bothered to find out what happened to them. In the United States, really incredibly successful campaigns have happened online because we refuse to be civil to those who don't recognize our humanity. So for those who say, be civil, for those who say, be polite, I have an entire chapter on the political importance of profanity. And I remind them of a Ugandan feminist called Dr. Stella Nyanzi, who is currently in prison in Uganda because she wrote a poem on Facebook wishing that the mother of the dictator of her country had poisoned him, that her birth canal had poisoned him during birth. And when she was taken to court and during her sentencing, she was videotaped in because she's known for her profanity. She stood there in the video, she took off her top, she jiggled her breasts, and she said, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. In court.
Mona, I talked to you about this. Okay, you're watching. That's 3.
I disagree with Barack Obama. I agree with Stella Nyanzi.
You're watching Q&A live from Melbourne with a panel of outspoken feminists.
I want to address further the protest point, because I think this is a really significant moment in your history. And I say this as that Egyptian American, because, you know, one part of me, Egypt, we began a revolution in 2011, and it's not gone very well, obviously. And the other part of me is the American, and we have this fascist fuck called Donald Trump as president. And your prime minister here is a mini version of Donald Trump, because we're talking about white supremacist capitalists, etc., etc. And we've got Donald Trump is a wannabe dictator. He wants to be able to do what the fascist president of my country of birth is doing. And when your prime minister, who is also a Christian evangelical, like Mike Pence in the United States, white evangelicals in the US voted for Trump. So you're on a parallel path here. When they start talking about the media as enemies of the people, when they start talking about banning boycotts, you have to start asking what is happening to your so-called democracy. As young people, and people of all ages, not just young people, are rising up against the world. I mean, across the world, Chile, Hong Kong, Lebanon, Iraq, people are risking their lives for the sake of protest. And your ostensibly democratically elected prime minister wants to ban boycotts. Boycotts helped end apartheid in South Africa. Oh, yeah. So ask yourself, where is he taking you?
And they test your boundaries as well. But, you know, that's...
Mona, I'm just wondering, there's people, kids mostly on the streets in Hong Kong, young men and women in Iraq,
Lebanon,
in Lebanon.
Chile.
Is something different happening now? It isn't just social media or what are they, Slack to visit. It's not that.
It's not.
It's people on the streets.
I think what we're seeing happening across the world is the rise of two things. One is we're seeing these patriarchal authoritarians, as I've said, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in the US, Scott Morrison here and others. And then we're also seeing a rise of people saying no. People saying we will resist. And as a feminist, for me, feminism is the best kind of resistance to that patriarchal authoritarianism. Because when you see all of the countries rising up, they're rising up against corruption, they're rising up against capitalism, they're rising up in Lebanon, they're rising up against sectarianism. There was a women's protest on Sunday that was rising up against patriarchy, sectarianism, and authoritarianism and corruption. So you're looking, and that's really essential. And I think the reason that we know about so many of them, and it's so invigorating to see, is because of social media, is because we're so connected in ways that we weren't in the past. But I salute each and every person that goes out on the streets and risks their lives, and people have been killed for rights that you take for granted. So don't think that because your economy is doing well, but when you have a prime minister who wants the pockets of capitalist giants like coal mining. How can you be talking about coal as 16-year-old young women are on the street saying, what kind of world are you giving us? So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing people who are saying, no, we deserve better, against these old white men mostly, who are saying, no, we want to keep our hands on everything. Yeah, and clearly you have to be on this side. That's what's changing.
It's not their age, it's not their race, it's their privilege.
Well, I think that a lot of them, it is they're old men.
They are indeed old men, and many are white, but that is because of the privilege that they have enjoyed their whole lives, that they are trying damn hard to hold on to, that is being threatened,
but also
as it never
underneath
has
the
been.
privilege, isn't it?
I have a great answer for this that a lot of people do not like. I want patriarchy to fear feminism. And there is a chapter in my book on violence. There is a chapter on my book about white women who voted for Trump and white women who accept crumbs from patriarchy because they allow their whiteness to trump their gender. I'm fully aware of this. But at the end of the day, even those white women have to recognize that nothing protects them from patriarchy. Nothing. For me, as a feminist, the most important thing is to destroy patriarchy. And all of this talk about how if you talk about violence, you're just becoming like the men. My question, so your question is a really important one, but I'm going to answer it with another question. How long must we wait for men and boys to stop murdering us, to stop beating us, and to stop raping us? How many rapists must we kill? Not the state, because I disagree with the death penalty, and I want to get rid of incarceration, and I'm with you on the police. So I want women themselves. As a woman, I'm asking, how many rapists must we kill until men stop raping us?
So, Mona, them's fighting words. Spectator Australia is already saying Mona's promoting violence. Mm-hmm. That's what you're doing?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm saying that violence has been owned by the state. That violence has been given by the state to its police. That violence has been allowed to continue, unchecked mostly, by men, especially privileged men. So exactly how long do I have to wait to be safe?
Okay,
and when I say to
Murray,
be safe,
Murray,
there's a hierarchy of safety too. Obviously, people of colour, disabled people, etc.
Murray, what do you think of that answer? How do you feel about this?
I guess there's two things. One is there's a lot of smashing and destroying.
Yes.
But what's the alternative? So
the alternative is a world where I'm not raped and murdered.
Yeah.
I think, who's that bloody quote, like appealing to your oppressor?
Assafiri. It's throughout history, no one has ever gotten their right or their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of their oppressor. It's fascinating for me that men constantly ask, oh, you don't want to become like us. You know, so don't use violence.
Let's let Mona and then you, Nayuka.
In the chapter I wrote on violence, I looked into, in the US, for example, not everybody can even call the police so that it can even be a case. Because if you're a person of colour and you call the police in a domestic violence case, invariably someone is going to be killed or hurt, and it actually is more harmful for a woman of colour in many communities, especially black women, to call the police. And I'm always taken back to a quote by feminist psychiatrist Judith Herman, who said the legal system was designed to protect men from the superior power of the state and not to protect women and children from the superior power of men. So, and when we talk about the police themselves are sometimes domestic abusers. So and who in the United States, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, who in the United States would call the police if there's a domestic violence incident and would hope to survive? It would be white people. So it's not working for us as people of colour. And when it comes to the sentencing, it's like what I said about civility and respectability. This is a legal system that is set up against us. This entire game is rigged. And you look across the world, I mean, I'm glad there are positive examples, but the entire system is rigged. And so there's another legal specialist called Mary Ann Franks who wrote a law article in which she says we need optimal levels of violence, where men think twice before being violent to a woman. And she, a law professor, is saying that women need to practice justifiable violence against men's unjustifiable violence, and men need to be less unjustifiably violence against women. Okay. I think this is the system.
Okay. No,
You know, I find it really fascinating that we've heard about so many instances of male violence against women, that real incidents, whether it's disabled women or women in domestic abuse of all forms of abilities. And yet when I talk about imaginary violence against men, everyone's like, oh my God, Mona wants us to kill men. And I'm just asking you to imagine a scenario that is the daily reality for women everywhere. I agree with you that, yes, the gender binary is long overdue. Let's get rid of it. Fuck the gender binary, yes. But we are also talking about a society that socializes boys and men into believing that they are entitled to women's time, bodies, love, affection. In the United States, that has a direct impact into boys as young as 16 going into school and shooting to death half their class because a girl said no.
So what would positive masculinity look like?
I have no fucking idea.
Hannah.
You care.
Okay,
Very short.
I'm just going to tell you what I've learned as I've gotten older, because I'm 52 years old. The older I get, the queerer I am. And my partner is a bisexual man. And I'm urging the cis straight men out there, there is something deeply broken in you and in the way that you move through the world. As you get older, learn from people like us so that this can be a better world. Be queerer. Be more bisexual. Be less cisgendered in the way that you move through the world. Just fuck it all up and be free.
Hannah? And you can continue this discussion on Facebook and Twitter. That's it. So long and farewell. Thank you.